So I was just watching cable news, and they were discussing the latest in the Trump Epstein saga. And they were specifically discussing the release of information and what information could be released and why hasn't it been released and all of this stuff. And they played a clip of Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, this loathsome little fucking creep of a human being. And he was, I guess it's some sort of town hall event. He was standing in front of a group of people seated behind him. It looked like the Fox News audience. So you can imagine what they looked like. Anyway, he was asked about the release of information, and he said that he wanted all the information that could possibly be released to be released. And that, by the way, President Trump also wants that. He wants that information released just as much as all of us do. And we're working hard to figure out how we can do that. Of course, that is just a load of horse shit. Donald Trump does not, as we know, want any information released. By the way, if you haven't seen it, I did a video recently about grand jury information being released because Donald Trump has called on Pam Bondi to petition the court to release grand jury information. I explained what information a grand jury has, what these specific grand juries that heard the case against Epstein and Maxwell heard in terms of witnesses, and why this whole thing where Trump calls for the release of grand jury information is just part of the cover-up. So if you haven't watched that, please watch that video. But I want to deal with this scumbag Mike Johnson's assertion that Donald Trump wants all the information released. Of course, we know that is a lie. He's doing everything he can to cover this all up. The question is, what information could be released? Well, we have two different kinds of information that could potentially be released. We have law enforcement investigation material, and then we have grand jury information. Now, as I explained in that other video, the grand jury only has that information that prosecutors present to the grand jury. And the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the information that exists about Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and whoever else may have come up in the course of their investigation, including convicted felon Donald Trump, most of that information is law enforcement investigation stuff, which would be held by the various law enforcement agencies that had any part in investigating any of this. And it would be in the hands of prosecutors who were handled these cases as well. So that's information at the federal level that would be held by the DOJ, the lawyers at DOJ, and the FBI, which of course is part of the DOJ, all of which is controlled by Donald Trump. There's also investigative material compiled by law enforcement officers at the state level, because I explained in that video, again, about the grand jury. By the way, it's called Two Witnesses, and I'll link it in the description below. Anyway, we know that one of the only two witnesses who appeared before those grand juries was a New York police detective. So the NYPD was also investigating this to some degree. The extent to which they were investigating, I don't know. So we have investigative materials at the federal level, FBI, DOJ, and at the state level, at the bare minimum, we know NYPD. All of that could be released. Donald Trump has control over all the information held by the FBI and Main Justice. He could release that anytime he wants. He can just order it to be released, and it could be released. And names and your victim information could all be redacted. But all of that information could be released. If Trump wanted it released, it would be released. It's not being released because Trump doesn't want it released. It is no more complicated than that. Now, the stuff that's held at the state level, that could be released as well, but Donald Trump doesn't have any direct control over that. That would have to be done at the state level. Then you have the grand jury information. You would need permission from the court to release grand jury information. That's likely not going to happen. And again, as I explained in that video, there's almost nothing there that would be pertinent to this anyway. So this whole thing is a cover-up from top to bottom, but they want to make it look like it's not a cover-up because they have a problem. Trump has a problem. Mike Johnson has a problem. And that problem is their base wants this information released. They've been demanding its release for years. These people have constructed a whole conspiracy theory in their heads that they believe, without question, that there is this really an international pedophile ring with Jeffrey Epstein at the epicenter. And they think that in that information is incriminating information against the world's most powerful people, a whole network of them. And they think, of course, in this country, mostly Democrats, because Republicans don't do that kind of thing. Despite the fact that, it seems every time I read a story in the news about somebody getting busted for child sex trafficking or possession of child pornography or something like that, it is almost always a Republican. Almost every single time, and more often than not, it's an evangelical Republican. Anyway, their problem is that their base wants these people exposed. They want all that information out. And that's why this story is so potentially damaging and has been damaging to Donald Trump so far. Not nearly damaging enough. Certainly not to the point that it's going to bring him down. Maybe it never will reach that point. It's certainly not at that point now. But it's a big problem. And it's not going away, and it shouldn't go away. And we need to make sure that it doesn't go away. Do not take the bait. Do not let them change the subject. Keep it on Epstein. Anyway, thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.